Thanks very much. Thank you for asking me to be here to talk to you today. I am Ronnie Cowan, I'm the SNP MP for Inverclyde, and today I stand before you a very angry man. I'm not naturally angry, or I'm trying in later life to be less angry than I used to be. I used to be a very angry young man. I'm less curmudgeonly now, but when I woke up at 5:30 this morning to get the 6:30 train to come through here, I was in a pretty good mood. I got home late last night, but you know, I got home on a Wednesday night. It's good for Westminster. And I was reading my speaking notes coming through in the train, and then my office kicked about 8 o'clock and started sending me through, as they do, the news for the day, and I read through the media as it's unfolding. And I saw a couple of stories in today's newspapers, and that's what started to get under my skin. Because you might have seen yesterday's front page of the Times talking about an increase in gambling harm, and today the Daily Mail are reporting on what they're perceiving to be the outcome of the gambling white paper. Now, it's their perception, but I know from experience what government departments do is they fly ideas out there. They'll have things get leaked, but they get leaked to see how people react to them. And my reaction to what I've read today in the Daily Mail, which is not my normal read, was one of disbelief, anger, disappointment. But it's something that I have to address my anger issues, and I have to address what's happening at Westminster. So I'm of the view that we want to educate and we want to inform. We want to provide people with the tools to control their gambling. We want to help people avoid being trapped in addiction, which is all absolutely laudable. And I applaud and I support those that are educating and informing our communities, and in particular our young adults and our children. But we are up against an industry that has relentlessly pushed its products onto the marketplace and often onto those who have already been damaged by them. The gambling industry is actively grooming the next generation of gamblers and paying scant regard to health and safety of its current consumers. I don't say this lightly. Like most of you, I have witnessed this. A young man that has suffered an acquired brain injury came in front of our all-party parliamentary group to give evidence. He'd been encouraged to gamble his financial settlement over £250,000 by a gambling firm that were aware of his condition, and that his condition increased his desire to take risks and encouraged repetitive behaviour. They ignored his pleas to stop messaging him while he was in a psychiatric ward and offered him bets. They drained him dry. I've met with families from Gambling with Life to hear the stories of their loved ones that completed suicide, driven there by incessant inducements to gamble, despite their protestations not to be contacted. Imagine that scenario. I was in the Gambling with Life who did the big step. I was walking along with one of the guys there. He said to me, he said, "You know what that's like? That's like a recovering alcoholic been offered free drinks by his local barman." That's what the CEOs of those big gambling firms are doing. Effectively, they're dragging people back into addiction with the full knowledge of the damage they're causing. That's what we have in the gambling industry. Contact their database, offering incentives to gamble. According to the last Gambling Commission, 31% of 11 to 16-year-olds spent money on gambling in the last year. And an estimated 30,000 children are problem gamblers, with a further 75,000 classed as at risk. There are an estimated 1.4 million problem gamblers of all ages. And this week, doctors warned of a surge in gambling addicts turning up at A&E. Figures show a 42% annual rise in demand for gambling clinics. This does not happen by accident. This is the result of an industry that is out of control. Since the 2005 Gambling Act allowed the industry to self-govern, it has changed out of all recognition. Analogue legislation for a digital age is a phrase I'm sure you've heard before. The legislation was cast in 2005, and in 2007 the iPhone appeared, and it changed everything. A lack of self-governance by the industry and relentless advertising campaigns have resulted in record numbers of addiction, suicide and gambling harm. With that knowledge, you may expect the industry to reflect upon itself and seek to close VIP rooms, end advertising, submit to a smart statutory levy, but it won't. Instead, it's fighting against reform tooth and nail. It's paying lip service to change and paying elected members to lobby for them in the corridors of power. I can guarantee you that none of us who are opposing this legislation are paid by anybody to oppose this legislation. I'm sure it's not escaped your notice that the political landscape within the Conservative and Unionist government of Westwood has changed a few times over recent years, months and weeks. I've been an MP for 7.5 years and I'm now my 5th Prime Minister, my 8th Secretary of State for DCMS, and I've also worked with 9 gambling ministers in the 4 years since they invented that post. This chaos does not help develop good legislation. And all the delays mean that more people have been and will be open to this sort of inducement and damage. The new ministers understandably require time to get up to speed with their portfolios. The result of that is that legislation slows down to a snail's pace. The all-party parliamentary group for gambling-related harm met with the Secretary of State last week, and we will meet with the Gambling Minister Paul Scully next Monday. And I should explain that the APPG is an all-party group. It is completely non-party political, and the gambling-related harm is driven by Ian Duncan-Smith of the Conservative and Unionists, Caroline Harris of the Labour Party, and myself. Now, sitting beside Paul Scully will be the long-suffering civil servants who have heard me rehearse these same arguments for many, many years. But in regard to the white paper that has been produced now, I have 6 key asks. A statutory smart levy should be placed on operators to fund gambling harm research, education and treatment. Currently, the treatment of gambling harm is partially funded through a system of voluntary contributions from gambling operators. The current recommendation is that this should be 0.1% of operators' gross gambling donations, totaling around £10 million. Zoe Osmond, Chief Executive of Gamble Aware, commented on the current levy, stating the industry has never reached its target of achieving 0.1% of GGY from the voluntary industry levy. And as a result, there's a lack of stability in the voluntary funding model, preventing recipients from effectively planning budgets and staffing needed for various projects aimed at reducing gambling harm in the UK. I'm going to have to speed up then, okay? I'm getting timed out already. I want to see limits on the stakes online. We have to bring them online, the offline gambling, to make it comparable with the on-land gambling. We have to look at affordability checks and see how they can be implemented. We have to look at the so-called VIP schemes and inducements to gambling. They should be outlawed. We have to look at far stricter controls on gambling advertising, which to me is an absolute must and one of the major things the UK government are now kicking back against. And a gambling ombudsman should be set up to ensure a means for consumer redress. And let me address the elephant in the room. Gamble Aware and Fast Forward are funded directly by the gambling industry. My concerns are not with the work they do. I respect these organisations and the people within them and know the good work they are doing, but I want them to be free of any potential influence that research, education and support should not be directly funded by the industry that is causing the damage. The polluter should pay, but a smart statutory levy would raise over £140 million and be ring-fenced to fund research, education and support. We could triple at least the funding to Gamble Aware and Fast Forward, and importantly guarantee funding for years to come, thus freeing them up to do the job they're doing so well and to bring on new staff to nurture, to develop them over a number of years. I have real concerns that the impending white paper will be watered down to such a degree that it will be virtually meaningless. It's my intention, and that of the APPG, to ensure that it is not. And my plea to you is that you write to your MP and tell them that you have concerns of the white paper, the things you'd like to see in there, and ask them to talk to me. Thank you very much.